I want to introduce you today to a very famous feature of the text of the story of creation, and one which attracted a lot of attention and generated a lot of comment, much of it both ignorant and prejudiced, leading to entirely false conclusions. So we'll look at the text together, and then I'll explain to you how it was misunderstood, and then I'll explain to you the way it should be understood. So page 9, we have a description of the creation of man. And of course, when they write this in English, they capitalize the word man because it means the species. It doesn't mean male sex particularly. And God said, top of the page, 26, and God said, let us make man in our form. As I explained to you yesterday, the word in Hebrew has no visual connotations. Can't make pictures of it. Maimonides just explains this in the first chapter of the guide. After our likeness, meaning having some quality in common, or some qualities in common. They shall rule over the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, and over the animal of the whole earth, every creeping thing that creeps upon the earth.
I have a question before that.
Yeah, sure.
It says, let us make man in our image.
Right.
So who is us in that sense?
First of all, there is a usage throughout the 1,000 pages of the Hebrew Bible where this was called the royal we, and it's used elsewhere as well. It was taken for the Bible, it's used in Old English and the rest, where a king or someone who has special status refers to himself in the plural. When the brothers go down to Egypt and they're confronted by Joseph, who's pretending to be an Egyptian, and they don't recognize him, and he treats them harshly. When they go back to their father, Jacob, and they report on their experience, it says, Adonai ha'aretz, the masters of the land, spoke to us harshly. The word Adonai in Hebrew is plural. It was only one speech, it was only one person, it was only Joseph, but he's referring to someone who is the viceroy to the king, so to show respect, it's common to use the plural. So the simple reading of it is that it's God speaking in terms of royalty. There's a hint that he took in terms of the simplest reading of the literal text, that would be the right thing to say. And then 27 says, 26 is like a statement of resolve, and 27 is that he did it. And it says, he created man in his image, in his form, the form of God created him, male and female. So there you are, that it's not the male sex, it's the species with male and female, created them. And he blessed them and said to them, be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it, rule over the fish of the sea, the bird of the sky, and every living thing that moves on the earth. And then it says, behold, I've given to you all the vegetation, herbage is a little anachronistic, vegetation yielding seed that is on the surface of the entire earth, every tree that has seed yielding fruit should be yours for food. Which means eating edible materials from the world, when you do that, you incorporate it into yourself and you destroy it for the sake of your nutrition, can't be taken for granted. You didn't create it, you didn't make it, you didn't plant it, you didn't cultivate it. So it belongs to the Creator. So something has to be said about how you use it. This I've given to you for food, and to every beast of the earth, every bird of the sky, everything that moves on the earth, within the living soul, every green herb is for food, and it was so. So, in this respect, he's telling man that he gave it to him. Not telling the animals won't understand if you tell them, but he's telling that all of this has been created by me, the Creator, for the sake of your sustaining yourselves, you and the whole animal world. That's one description of the creation of man. Now, on the next page, starting with verse 4, these are the products of heaven and earth when they were created, and the day that Hashem, God, made heaven and earth. Trees were not on the earth, and there was no fruit, there was no man to work the soil, there was a mist. And verse 7, Hashem, God, formed man of dirt of the ground, and he blew into his nostrils the soul of life, and man became a living being. By the way, I say dirt rather than dust because in Hebrew, the word for dust is avak, and that's not what it says in the Hebrew here. In the Hebrew here it says afar, and afar means, well, a less rough word would be soil, which may be adamah in Hebrew. In other words, it's the soil of the ground, and that's what the body was formed from, and he blew into his soul's nostrils of life, and man became a living being. And then comes the whole sequence of the Garden of Eden. Now, by the way, you should just know the chapters here were made by medieval Christians. They have no significance in the text whatsoever. So the fact that this is in chapter 1 and this is chapter 2 means absolutely nothing. From the point of view of the Hebrew text, it's just one flowing text.
Why do we use their numbering?
Because it's very convenient. Even though in some places we know that it doesn't break up the text in the appropriate way, it's a very convenient way to refer to it. By the way, the Talmud also had no page numbers. And that's why Rashi, when he makes a cross-reference in this commentary in the Talmud, always says, you'll find it in that chapter of that and that Masech. And then in parentheses, you'll see after the pagination came when they created a printing press, and you had separate pages. That's always put in because it's much more convenient to find. But you should read no significance into it whatsoever.
Why didn't we renumber it?
I don't know. I don't know why we have it. Anyway, yeah.
It says Eretz V'Shamayim over there in Pasuk Dalet, and it's usually Shemayim V'Aretz.
Not usually. Sometimes it's one, sometimes it's the other.
Yeah.
But that's not what I'm working on the creation of man now. Now the official story in certain circles is that there are two different creation stories, two stories. And they're very different. Their content is different. Their focus is different. Their context is different. And two different stories means two different authors. Of course, one author wouldn't write two stories. He'd write one story. So, therefore, we have a piece of strong evidence that there wasn't a single author to the text. It was written by many people. This is called the documentary hypothesis or the higher biblical criticism. And then there's a whole story about who the editor might have been, who put all the texts together, a whole long fantasy story like that. Let's see. If I wanted to enforce the idea that they're different authors and it's a different story, I think I would look for contradictions. I would look for a contradiction. One story says that he was created just like a horse. And the other story says he was created with a godly form. Then I would say, doesn't sound right that he's created just like a horse and also with a godly form. The horses don't have a godly form, so that doesn't sit together. It's like a contradiction. Could that be part of one story? If you have a contradiction, then there's some motivation to think that maybe it doesn't come from one source. Is there any contradiction here? The first story says he made him in such a way as to have a godly form and be similar to God in some way. It gives no details as to the process of creation. That describes the output, the outcome. When he's created, this is what his features are. It doesn't explain how it happened. And the second story explains how it happened. Maybe the second story is filling in details of the first story. Or maybe it's one story and it's being told in two phases. Let me ask you, do you ever have things like that in literature that you're familiar with? Don't some stories start with, and he took the axe and threw it at the target? It starts that way. You don't know who he is. You don't know what the target was doing there. You don't know why he's doing that. That's to spark your interest, right? In chapter 3, you'll find out that he was training for the Olympic axe throwing contest or something. So in chapter 1, you get a bare description. In chapter 3, you get the background, which explains what was going on in chapter 1. Doesn't that sort of thing happen in books that we read? Or trivial books that aren't very... So why would you think over here that it's two different stories, two different accounts, and why not think that it's one story told in pieces? In particular, the first story talks about the creation of the whole of the natural world. And it has certain themes. For example, it has reproduction as a theme. I mentioned this. That was one of the things that my Rabbi Zatzal he wrote in some of his writings, that everything this is how it reproduces. And what is said to man in the first story is, be fruitful and multiply and spread out over the world. Means he's being treated in the same way that the vegetation is treated and the animals are treated, and he also should reproduce, multiply, and spread out. In the second story that we just read, it doesn't say anything about reproduction. It doesn't even say that yet that God spoke to man. It just created him. But his creation now takes on a very different aspect. All the other creatures come out of something that's not. Many of them come out of the earth, some come out of water, and they're produced by those physical elements in some way or other. Here it says, number one, nothing produced his body. God made his body out of the soil, and God blew into his nostrils a breath of life. That's utterly like anything else on the planet. So what's being stressed here is man's uniqueness, not his commonality with the rest of the world, but the ways in which he's unique from the rest of the world. Now, the Garden of Eden is a moral story. God gives man a command, and man violates the command, and man is punished and expelled from the garden. Nothing like that happens in chapter 1. Chapter 1 pictures man as part of the natural creation. And chapter 2 explains the respects in which he's not part of the natural creation. And those are two different subjects about man, and they're separated out into two different streams of text. That's not so terribly unnatural, seems to me. And maybe it's the breath of life that God blew into his nostrils and he became a living being. Maybe it's that qualifies him for having some of God's form. Now you get an explanation of the process that brought about the product which we saw before. All we got before was, once he was created with a godly form and some likeness to God. Doesn't explain how, what constituted it. Now you get something in the details of the process which leads you to have some idea. Maybe it's because of that which God presented him with. And maybe we should put in here a remark of the Zohar. Why does it say that he blew into his nostrils? Well, when you exhale, the air comes from the very middle of your body. It comes from the lungs. So if you're talking about, God didn't take a soul out of the warehouse and inject it into him. He didn't create the soul in him. He gave to man something of himself. And the Zohar says when you exhale from your midst. It means it's coming from something that's central to you. Well, that could be the vehicle by which you say that he has a godly form. So you're getting details here which cast more light on the previous. And therefore, it seems you could easily read it as simply picking up details that weren't given before and picking up details in a different context. Because, as I said, the second story is going to take him into the Garden of Eden and have a command and a violation of the command. In other words, it's moral and spiritual. And that you don't have directly in the first story. He's not given any, He's only told to reproduce and multiply, which was the way in which all the animals and the vegetation were created, and which man has a natural instinct to do anyway. So this second description of the process of creation fits together with the moral challenge and the story of the rebellion and the punishment that comes afterwards. And there's one more feature that I want to mention, and I'll take your question. And another feature is this: the first story, which ends up with on top of page 11, the first three verses of chapter 2, heaven and earth were finished, seventh day, God rested, and so forth and so on. That story is perfect. It's perfect. You have the whole of the creation, and it comes to an end on the seventh day, and everything is wonderful. The next sequence talks about something which happened on the sixth day, and it wasn't perfect. Indeed, it was a failure and ended up in a disaster. So that there may be a reason to look at the entire sequence from 2 points of view. From one point of view, from the point of view of God who's creating it, it's a perfect conclusion. And then there's a disturbing element which has to be responded to, which is treated separately. And this is exactly paralleled in the building of the tabernacle. The building of the tabernacle, which is the last half of the book of Exodus, God gives all the instructions, and everything's carried out, and everything is perfect. And the tabernacle is inaugurated, and God's presence fills the tabernacle. Everything is perfect. Only later, several chapters later in the book of Leviticus, do you find out that Aaron's two oldest sons brought an offering that they weren't commanded to bring, and they were killed. There was death on that day of inauguration. You don't have that before. So again, you have a story of creating something and completing it without any disturbing factors. And afterwards, you have filling in of a sequence which had a very different character. You have it twice. Looks like that's the way the text presents itself. It presents itself in a certain structure where one sequence comes to an end and then another sequence fills in. And there's another example of this. Joseph is attacked by his brothers, and they sell him into slavery, and the sequence ends with he was sold into slavery, and Potiphar bought him and became a slave in Egypt. Then the text goes back and fills in what happened in the meantime. It's not sequential. On the contrary. First, you finished the story of Joseph. Joseph was attacked, and he was sold again, and then he ended up as a slave in Egypt. And now we go back several weeks and fill in interim events, because first we were finishing Joseph's story, and now we're going, what happened to him, and now we're going back to the brothers, explaining what happened to him. So this idea of finishing one story and then going back to pick up the threads of a story that's in the middle is something which is common in the text. This happens in large-scale stories. It happens in microcosm. Eliezer comes to the well, and Rebecca goes to the house and says to her brother Lavan, there's a messenger there, an agent who's come from Abraham's house, and he's there with the camels and everything else. And the text says, and Lavan ran to the well, to where Eliezer was. Next sentence, when his sister came home, and when he saw the jewelry on his sister's arms, and on her neck, and on her ears, and her nose, when he saw the jewelry, then he went out to the well where Eliezer was standing. Now, the previous sentence says he's already at the well. And now it says it again. Well, one says what he did, and the second sentence says why he did it. Yes, when she came home and said that Eliezer's there, he went out to the well. But why did he go? I'll tell you why. Because when she came home and he saw the jewelry and he thought this is an emissary from Abraham who could be rich and could be useful, so again, first you tell me what he did and then you go back and tell me why he did it. That's a feature of the text. It even happens in halacha with the birds on the altar. For those who know, I'm not going to do that now. But the same thing is true. You carry one thing to an ending, and then you go back and fill in other features which have a different significance. There's absolutely no reason whatsoever here to say two different stories, by two different authors, and two different philosophies, and two different pictures of the world. It's a style of the text. A great deal of unfortunate discussion was generated by this foolish observation. Yes?
Probably a popular question, but so it's talking about how Hashem breathed or created man from soil, but it seems like we have science, evidence, whatever you just want to call it, that we have evolution of animals coming from tiny organisms to the we have a common ancestor for animals. Is that to say that mankind does not branch off part of that, and it's just like all of animals are created, and then we just get a lump of dirt, and then that proves the man from in the same style, or?
For sure, it is to say that man is not a product of the evolutionary process. That's for sure correct. It also means that the animals aren't a product of the evolutionary process either. If we had like 2 weeks to study evolution, I could do it for you. But I'll just say this. There's a big difference between explaining how something happened by saying it might have happened this way versus saying it did happen this way. One second. He did it. Why did he do it? Well, he needed money. Yeah, he needed money. So why did he do it? Well, he needed money. Yeah. But do you know that he did it for money? Do you know that? He needed money since he needed money, that could be a motivation for doing it. So maybe that's why he did it. But did you find a note in his diary? I've got to pay the debt, and therefore I'm going to steal money? You didn't find that? So how do you know that's why he did it? All you have is a possible explanation, not an actual explanation. And 82.44% of evolution is possible explanations. It could have happened this way. But very rarely, to vanishingly, do you actually have the evidence that it did happen that way. For example, you don't have evidence of mutations that add useful function. The adaptations for which we have discovered mutations, almost all of them, maybe all of them, are adaptations which destroy function, don't add function. It just so happens that in the context that the creature is living, the function it has is bad for it, and destroying the function makes it more successful. That sounds paradoxical. I'll give you a very simple example. How do antibiotics work? Antibiotics work by attaching a molecule to the DNA of the bacterium, so that portion of the DNA of the bacterium doesn't work, and that's what kills the bacterium. So the mutation simply breaks that part of the DNA. Since it breaks that part of the DNA, the part where it attaches, the antibiotic can't attach. If it can't attach, it can't mask that portion of the DNA, and the rest of the DNA works. So by breaking part, you protect it from something, a piece of bubble gum, which is going to stick it up and make it not work. So you're better off without that piece of DNA, because there's nothing for the antibiotic to lock onto, but you lose the function of that piece. That's how losing a function can be very successful. And where we've been able to document the changes of the genes, where the mutation is documented, they're breaking genes, not making new genes. We don't have increase of information in the genome documented by evolutionary means. So when you say, but look, this has a function that it has sharper claws and so forth and so on. One of the, I think Ernst Mayr said this, the human brain evolved, so far as we know, once in the whole biome. The eye evolved, light-sensitive organs evolved more than 40 different times. You might think, well, that means eyes are really very, very important. And the brain, gosh, if it only happened once, maybe not. Well, one of the things that makes the human being so unique and so successful is that it has a very long incompetence period. No creature has, not in absolute time nor in relative time to lifetime, so long a period where the newly born creature is totally helpless. Is that good? Suppose you had the human mutation and you had it in the fossils and humanity had died out. It would be very easy to explain. If you have 7 or 8 years of incompetence, that's food for the saber-toothed tiger. The parents can't defend against the saber-toothed tiger, let's eat the children. So the children didn't make it to maturity. That's why they died out. Too big a brain, too slow development. Easy explanation. Post facto, you can make up any explanations you want. So when you have a disciplined, that's too generous a word, you have a cultural form which engages in what they call just so stories because of the English writers, you have to be suspicious. I'm not getting the real deal. I'm not getting the real reason. So we're not. I believe that if you do a careful study of evolution, I've done some of it, you'll find that there certainly isn't adequate evidence to believe that it's true. Some think that there's adequate evidence to believe that it's false. David Gelernter was a professor of computer science at Yale, so I suppose he's not dumb, has examined a certain calculation, and he says this calculation shows that the Darwinian evolution story for the development of life can't be right. He's published it. Farewell to Darwin. You can look it up. He's doing it on the basis of a mathematical calculation. I think that's science. Isn't it science last time we checked? Not quoting the Bible against evolution. He's saying, you guys say it works this way. Well, I'm a mathematician, and it doesn't work. So I don't go that far. I'm not as good a mathematician as he is. Can't follow all the details of mathematics, but I think I can show consistently, since my field is logic, that it certainly isn't good enough reason to pledge allegiance. So I'm not worried about it. Whether it follows the evolutionary picture or it doesn't follow the evolutionary picture, I'm not worried about it.
Because it wasn't exactly my question, though. I was still. It was more so saying that there's an intent to the I guess maybe I don't know. The evolutionary tree still seems to fit with being directed by Hashem's influence, or like the branching. So like that was more of my question. Is like the branching of species that could still be directed and influenced to.
Okay, so this is a slightly different problem, slightly different question. First of all, look it up, and you'll find that the evolutionary tree is in serious trouble because there are at least 2 and maybe 4 of them. One of them is from the fossils, and one of them is from the molecular clocks, which trace the rate of change in molecules, and they give you different contradictory trees. And since those are the 2 big areas of evidence, that's not good for the theory. Look it up, and you'll see that that's correct. And then different molecules give you different molecular clocks, and there isn't even consistency within the molecular clocks. But okay, leaving that aside. But the question is, when you're talking about, let's say, evolution and Judaism, what is the thing on the Jewish side that you want to reconcile with evolution? Is it the 31 verses in the first chapter of Genesis? Is that what you want to reconcile? Is it the 1,000 pages of Tanakh that you want to reconcile? Is it Judaism with the oral tradition included that you want to reconcile? What is it that you're trying to reconcile? the idea of divinely directed evolution is certainly possible. That evolution doesn't prove that God didn't direct it. That's obvious. Even the people who believe in evolution understand that. And the even is meant on purpose. But the description in chapter 1 says that God initiated these things by a command, and the earth brought them forth, and so forth and so on. So first thing you have to say is, well, that's just poetry. That's not meant literally, and so forth and so on. Well, who told you? Why would you say that? Because you're dying to reconcile Judaism with the latest scientific findings? And you feel embarrassed and behind the 8 ball if you don't, and you'll be embarrassed in front of your friends who believe in evolution and so forth and so on? I say don't be embarrassed. Don't be embarrassed and don't be afraid. Go through it in more detail. You'll see that there's more bravado than there is actual reason to accept what they say. So it's not going to work just to have divinely directed evolution, where the evolution is described the way it's described in the scientific story, because it doesn't fit with the text, nor with any of the oral material that we have in the tradition. It's just not going to work. So
it's, maybe that's still the answer. I just want to clarify to phrase the question.
Okay.
But I'm going to suspect that your answer is going to stay the same. That animals were all created first, and then man formed life separately from just like it's really only the line of form man from dust from the ground. So in my head, I picture all of the animals kind of spreading out and being made their own ways, and then after all the animals are just there, then a separate time, dirt just comes together and turns into a person.
Exactly.
Okay.
That's exactly what the text says.
Okay.
Right? It was not part of the process of making animals. In fact, the animals are brought forth by the sea and by the land. Hashem says to the earth, bring forth animals. Here he doesn't say anything to anybody. He just does it himself. He personally does it. Yeah.
Two questions. Is there any significance with the word Elohim in describing God in this case? Because what I mean by that is, what is that connotation associated with that word project on our image or understanding of what God is? And maybe that ties into my second question is, what does it mean when it says image, in our image?
Okay, so first of all, what you're asking is absolute gold. The whole first chapter and the first 3 verses on page 11, the only name of God that's used is what's pronounced Elohim. But if you look at verse 4 on chapter 11, page 11, you see that it isn't the same anymore. Because there's Hashem Elohim. It's 2 names together. And for the rest of this sequence, it's the 2 names together. And since 4 repeats the starting point of the products of heaven and earth, it means that we're going back to the original and now describing it with 2 names rather than 1. Now, the rabbinic understanding of this, which is based on a mountain of Kabbalistic ideas, is that the names of God, are associated with, but ultimately stand for, that's a long story, are associated with different modes of divine action. And the name in the first chapter is associated with the mode of divine action of strict judgment, justice. Interestingly, law, it's pointed out in biblical literature and in English also, that law is used 2 ways. You have laws of nature and you have legal laws. The word Elohim in Hebrew, when it's used to describe God, both is the one who's in charge of the laws of nature and also the one who executes the laws of morality and spirituality. So that's that name. The 4-letter name is associated by the tradition with the attribute of mercy, which is very, very different. In fact, in a certain sense, mercy and justice are contradictory to one another. Because the message of mercy always is, don't do what justice requires. That's the message. When justice says there's been a failure, and there has to be a response to the failure, and the response is some kind of punishment, some kind of deprivation, mercy says, not yet, not in whole, do it in stages, give the person another chance, take into account the fact that he has children. Mercy is always a reason not to execute strict justice. So the idea here is that there are two different pictures of the creation, and this is the famous midrash that first God thought of doing the creation with strict justice, and then when he saw that it wouldn't stand, he added to justice the attribute of mercy. We spoke about this yesterday. We spoke about it in detail. It's on YouTube. You can go back and I'm not going to do it again because these people were here yesterday. But you're absolutely right about the names. The names definitely have a connotation about what we should think about God in this context. Now, the other thing that you asked.
So does that reflect, or perhaps give us a clue what Hashem's image is?
Oh, so I mentioned before, the word image in English is not a good translation. Maimonides points out that the Hebrew word here, tselem, has no visual connotations. You don't say that you see tselem. You see tmuna. Tmuna means picture. You see toar. Toar means the visual form of a thing. 5 digits on each of its appendages, and, two legs and so forth and so on. Hairy body, that's toar. But tselem isn't like that. Tselem is really a form of a thing, a character of a thing. And yes, the second description, the detailed description of the process of creating man, definitely gives you an input to that, which the first doesn't at all. The first just says it's true, but doesn't give you any clue as how it's true, what makes it true. And that's why I say the second is supplementary to the first. That's the standard understanding. And everything that it says in the second and third chapters about the sequence of the Garden of Eden took place on the 6th day. So says Maimonides and everybody else, even as the philosopher says so. Yeah.
So around Rosh Hashanah time, somebody asked Breitowitz how the Satan can get confused. If it's the same Satan every year, right? So he said he gave an idea or shot or something like that. I don't want to quote him, whatever. But my understanding of it was that the Satan goes back into Hashem every year, into an energy force, and then he creates a new one every single year.
Okay.
So, but is that the same idea of him breathing into us and giving is the neshama completely is what he's breathing into us the neshama itself, or is the tselem elokim that the neshama itself?
Yes, but angels weren't created by breathing into them. They weren't created that way. So they didn't get what we have. They didn't get what we have. Only human beings have it. The creation of angels isn't mentioned explicitly. The oral tradition records it and gives it its place. But it's not created. But nothing other than man has this feature. And also nothing other than man has the feature of being created, b'tselem elokim. So this is absolutely unique. This is one of the reasons why people talk about human exceptionalism, and those who are holding the banner of science uber alles. No, not even uber alles. Science is alles. There isn't anything else but science. Those people are at war with this. Stephen Weinberg, who was a very intelligent person, who won the Nobel Prize in physics. I even corresponded with him once about some things. He wrote in his book, The First 3 Minutes, at the end of the book, he was really roasted for this. He said, the more we understand about the universe, the more pointless it seems. And except for the noble venture of mankind, I'm paraphrasing, of trying to understand the universe, which gives the universe at least a feature of tragic meaning. You know what that's like? Socrates said, people exist to think, because that's what they do best. And the things they think aren't all equal. And the highest thing to think is philosophy. Tell me, could it be that fact that Socrates, a philosopher, influenced him to say that? Or totally disconnected? Had nothing to do with it. You know, surgery saving life, garbage. Agriculture that feeds people, waste of time. Think philosophy, like me. Be like me, because that makes me the best. No, couldn't be, right? Same thing with Weinberg. Charity and love, worthless, meaningless, have no sense whatsoever. The only thing that has meaning enough to give the world any sense of value is the attempt to understand it the way I understand it. See, because I'm an understander. I'm a physicist, so I'm doing it. That makes me the best of everybody, right? That couldn't be his motivation, could it? Could it? Maybe? It was so crude. It was so superficial. It was, when you ask a scientist about philosophy, right, a scientist about religion, you get a person who's talking out of his element. Ask him about pions. He'll tell you a story that you can understand. Don't ask him about philosophy. Don't ask him about religion. Don't ask him about ultimate values. He was rightly roasted for that. And he's a great thinker. I'm not putting him down. But he's limited, like all of us are limited. You're limited to the areas that you studied and you have some mastery of. And when you opine on other things, you're not doing the right job.
Is the Yetzer Hara part of the Tzelem Elokim, or is it a part of dirt that we were formed?
No, it isn't part of the Tzelem Elokim, the godliness in man. And I'll prove it to you with something I said yesterday, and I've said before in the past. There's a kind of logical lever that you can use. I only discovered this a couple of years ago. If you want to find out the status of something in this world, ask yourself, will that thing exist in the world to come also, or not? Human beings are going to be there, and human beings are certainly going to have the whole of their essential qualities there. So if you ask, is X essential to man, essential to the world, essentially good? Ask yourself whether that X is going to be there in the world to come. Is there going to be an evil inclination in the world to come? Not at all. Well, then it can't be part of the godly form that man has, because man's not going to lose any of his godly form. So it's certainly not. It's a created thing. It's a thing which does a job to provide for free will, and even free will isn't going to be there. So free will isn't essential to man either. Right? All of that is simply a means to go through a process to produce what is ultimately the nature of the human being. It's only a means. It's not
Would that
right.
mean that it's from the dirt that we were formed from?
So the truth is, Rav Dessler has an essay on this. If you look at this of the literature, both in verses and in places in the Talmud and the Midrash, you find really two different pictures of Yetzer Hara, and he says they're both true. There are two different features of the world which play the role of evil. One is the body of the human being, and the other is a separate created force, which could be called an angel. And the difference between them, a difference between them is this. There are two different attitudes that produce actions that are bad. One is perversity. In Proverbs there's a verse, "Maim gduvim yimtaku," stolen waters are sweet. It's sweet because it's stolen. Because I got it, without paying for it. It's premeditatedly against good and against the right and against the just. That's one type of evil. And the other is an attitude that's just ignorant and unconcerned with moral matters, like someone who, I don't think they're honest when they say it, but they say it's all made up and it's just cultural and and it's just evolution and I'm an animal and I do what I want and so on. Don't bother me. Don't bother me. It might be right and I would do it. It might be wrong and I would do it. I don't care. Doesn't make any difference to me. Those are two different attitudes which can lead a person to do things that are bad. The second attitude you could repair. You could elevate because it's not against the right and the good on purpose. It's just I do what I do and let the chips fall where they may. You could gerrymander the person's life in such a way that even motivated to do what he wants to do, he'd be doing things that are good and right. The first one you can't do that to. By the way, we're meandering a little bit, by the way, this is one of the key ideas of capitalism. And it's an idea which I think is true, but it has certain limitations. The idea of capitalism is this. People are selfish, let them be selfish. Let them stay selfish. Create an open economy. What happens? You want to earn $1 million? How are you going to earn $1 million? How are you going to do that? You're going to make something that lots of people want, aren't you? So they'll buy what you make, and you'll rake in the money. So your selfishness leads you to benefit people, to really give them things that they want. Without making the person virtuous, still he's motivated by his selfishness to do things that are good for other people. Now I shifted from want to good, and that's a shift that has to be taken account of, but that's really quite an idea. Don't tell people to be virtuous, just tell them, you want to get ahead, you want money and power and prestige and everything else, make something that other people want. And that's the way you'll do it. That's the way they all did it. That's how billionaires became billionaires. They did it mostly by creating things that other people want. So you're benefiting society. That's a clever move. Where's the, I'm doing this, I worked this out when I was reading and teaching Rav Dessler also. Where's the weakness in it? Well, if I'm really motivated only selfishly, who says I'll play by the rules? Maybe I'll also cheat. Like, for example, getting the government to protect my industry against competition so I can charge higher prices. Oh, that wasn't the free market last time I checked. Yeah, but I don't care about freedom. I care about money. So if the free market is in place and it's regulated strictly, then people are going to make a lot of money by doing things that other people want, and everybody gets benefited. So that's how you co-opt something. You take something that could be bad and could be good. After all, again, being selfish might lead you to benefit other people. It might do that. You're not evil because you want to be evil. You just want what you want for yourself. And the free market is a way that you're wanting for yourself leads you to benefit other people, which is good for other people. That's the second kind of Yetzer Hara. So the body is the Yetzer Hara that you incorporate, you elevate, you sublimate, you make it part of you, and you purify it. But the other can't be purified that way. Yeah.
It's a little bit more of an abstract question, but it is in relation to this. How are we, in a sense, meant to view what God is based on the story that, number one, he's praised as a creator, and that he's able to give off of himself from within himself when he blew the nostril into man's nostrils. It just appears that God, in a sense, is limited by those connotations. Where my understanding of God is that he's everything in the whole world, but how does he then become like a singular creator who's able to give of himself?
Let's see, there are two things here. The singularity that you're worried about, and then this articulating the problem in terms of limited, and whether he can be everything. Now, I think the latter is an idea that needs critique, and maybe wholesale rejection. Let's see, God is everything, including evil? I wonder. And if God's really unlimited, which means you can't deny anything of God, everything that you say has to be true of God. Now watch this one. If God is really totally unlimited, he has to have every feature, because any feature you deny of him makes him less. Here's a feature then that you'll have to accept for him. It's a feature of being limited. That's a feature also. So by demanding that God be unlimited, you're going to have to accept that he is limited. That now sounds like gobbledygook. That doesn't sound consistent at all. Nowhere do I know of any source that says that God is unlimited. Some people want to read this into the medieval proposition of Ein Sof. Ein Sof means there's no end, and no limit, and no certain. But that's not. That's simply not correct. Let me ask you a question. How many whole numbers are there? 106? 2,947. That's how many. When you're 5 years old and your parent says to you, how many are there? You say, 1,000,000. And he says, what's 1,000,001? Oh, yeah, 1,000,001. 1,000,000,000! So, yeah, but what about 1,000,000,001? And then suddenly the 5-year-old thinks, hey, whatever I say, he's going to say and one, isn't he? I wonder. I guess there's no end. There's no end to the whole numbers. And that's correct. There's no end to the whole numbers. But notice that the whole numbers don't include the proper fractions, do they? So it isn't as if something's infinite means it includes everything. Infinite means that in a certain respect there's no end. Now, that leads to a conclusion which may be shocking to you, but God isn't a table. It's not shocking to me, because I never thought God was a physical thing. But some people are confused about this, and they think that God's got to be everything. God isn't evil, and God isn't a table. Of course, there are things that aren't God. God is the creator of other things. There's a creator on the one hand, and there are creatures or creations on the other hand. And God is not a creature. God is not created by anything else, not even by himself. So that being the case, he's not a creature, and that's one thing that he isn't. He's a creator, not a creature. So the idea that we deny things of God, absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, so now we have man doubly situated. Now, let's go back to what we said about the earth and the fact that the earth was told to make fruit trees bearing fruit. And we pointed out, the text says, the earth made trees bearing fruit, but not fruit trees bearing fruit. So it didn't do exactly what it was told to do. And we said, I was quoted the Maharal, who said that that which is earthly can't completely fulfill a command from heaven. That's the message of that text. The command comes from heaven, and a command is to the earth, and the earth does almost all, but not everything, because it's earth. So now when you read that man's body is made of earth, and the body is part of what he is, you then put two and two together, and you say, that's going to be a source for man's failure. By the way, I mentioned the other day, I mentioned it previously, because it occurred to me years ago, and I thought it was really appropriate, that it says God created, he told the earth to create trees bearing fruit. And it did create trees bearing fruit. What about oak trees? What about pine trees? Pine cones aren't fruit. Try eating them sometime. They're just elaborate seeds. What about that? So I said God didn't create trees without fruit. God created trees with fruit. And the fact that we have what's called, in Hebrew, are called ilanei srak, trees without fruit, that's a result of the failure of the Garden of Eden. And in the future, they will bear. That was something that occurred to me on the basis of a reading of a certain verse. I read it this morning in the Maharal, the Mecharusa. There are midrashim that say it word for word and explains it word for word, exactly what I said. So I had a very good, very exciting morning. When you think of something, I come from academia. In order to make a reputation, you got to say something that hasn't been said before. But Jewish learning isn't like that. If you come up with an idea and you find out that the Ritva said it or the Ramchal said it, that makes it joyful, because it means your mind went down the same groove that these very great people went down, and that means that your mind is thinking things that are true. The idea is not to be original. The idea is to be right. And if it's an idea that's new to you and it's right, that's a tremendous success. It means your mind is, at least to a certain extent, functioning in the right direction. That's what you take pride in. In Hebrew, we say, Baruch Shekivanti. Blessed Hashem that my intentions were carried out as accurate in the real world. So now we have man set up for this, his natural nature. Back to the fundamental idea I got here from Rabbi Soloveitchik, Yeshivat Ohr Somayach. I heard many lectures in Boston. There's natural man and covenantal man. A covenant with the divine, a calling. Although in the first story, man is given a command, but it's a command to do what all the other creatures, living creatures do, that is to reproduce and multiply. All the others, it's put into their nature. It's put into man's nature also. Had he not been told to reproduce, he'd have reproduced anyway. But God tells him that, so to speak, that he's behind it and he wants it. In the second chapter, he's put in an area and he has a certain responsibility for it, and he's told what he's not allowed to do, not to eat from the tree of knowledge. And according to many, there's a positive command to yes, eat from the other trees. So he has positive responsibilities and negative prohibitions. All of that now sets him up as a spiritual and moral creature, which makes him utterly divorced from the rest of the creation. None of the other creatures in the creation are spiritual and moral. Maybe for angels there's a tinge, 0.1% of their identity has a brushing with the spiritual and moral, but some would say none, and it's only a tinge for others. The whole spiritual and moral story of the world is the story of man. Man is created last because it's the purpose of the world. You achieve the purpose of a process at the end of the process. And like you say in L'Chadoidi, you say, Sof ma'aseh v'machshava tchila, that which is last in action is first in thought. Now that's a really philosophical remark. Last in action, first in thought. What kind of item in the world qualifies for that description? Last in action and first in thought.
An overthinker.
An
overthinker.
An overt?
Someone who overthinks.
I wouldn't say anything you want to do.
No.
I want to do that, and then it's like, okay, I need to, if I want to have an apple pie, first I need to go, then I need to make the apple pie. Then
That's
I
right.
need to go to the store, and then...
It's a goal. Every goal is like that. When you decide on a goal, you then decide on the means by which you will achieve the goal. So the first thing that you think of is the goal, and then you start to employ the means, and that which is first in thought is last in action, because achieving the goal is the end of the process of action. I think people use goals in their thinking all the time quite appropriately. It's not a mistake. It's not somehow a sickness to have goals in your thinking. And that's appropriate in all these sequences. Shabbos is the goal of the week because it comes at the end of the week, but it means that the rest of the week was created with Shabbos in mind. The goal is what drives the process. And it also means, this is only implied, it's not in the words of the Chadoidi, but it's implied, that the whole time the process is in force, what's guiding the process is the thought of the goal. And sometimes when you're in the middle of a process working towards a goal, and then you find out that there's a shortcut, and you don't need the whole of the process, you skip it. There are people 30, 40 years ago who got double degrees, MD, PhD. Well, the PhD was a 4-year program, and the MD was a 7 program. Now you have a single program that's MD, PhD, and you can do it in 6 or 7 years. You get both degrees faster because you integrate the studies. So you don't do it the old way anymore. You do it the new way. Because the goal was to get the MD, PhD, and now you can get it in a different way. So what accompanies the whole process is the thought of the purpose for which the process was instituted. And that's the way God runs the world as well. The goal is Olam Haba, the world to come. every stage along the way, what's directing the interaction of the Creator in the world, divine providence, is how shall this particular set of circumstances be used to push the project forward to get to Olam Haba. That's a symbol of intelligent design.
Is that what it means when we say on Shabbos, Seif Ma'aseh Melach Shabbat Akiva?
That's what I just quoted. That's exactly what I just quoted. Exactly right. You see, even when you're dancing and singing and you're full of ecstasy, there are things to think about also. I wouldn't be thinking first, even though I'm a philosopher, but okay, it could be, also.